Hi everybody, my name is Richard and I want to welcome you to today's webinar. So this webinar is part of our Resilient Kids and Youth project, and today I'm joined by one of our Outback Futures psychologists, Gavin Brown. And I'm really looking forward to jumping into the topic that we're going to talk about today. So welcome Gavin, thanks for having this conversation, and tell everybody what are we talking about today.
Yeah, hi Rich, thanks for having me. So today we're going to talk about 4 reasons why values are so important for our kids and our teenagers, our young people.
Sounds great. Sounds like a very, very important thing to talk about. And I guess before we get cracking into what those 4 things are, I think it's probably important that we define what values are, just so we're all on the same page. So can you briefly define what values are?
Yeah, so I guess when we're talking about values, really what we're talking about is kind of beliefs and ideas about what is important to us in life, and to some degree what kind of defines desirable behaviours. But I guess it's important to kind of know that, values are not a fixed set of rules as such, that are necessarily the same for everyone, because to some degree that idea about kind of what is important and what are desirable behaviours has, maybe some cultural elements to it, or gender elements, or a whole lot of different range of factors that can impact on that. So it's really that ability for us to kind of decide what are the principles, if you like, that I have that are going to kind of guide my life. That's really what we're talking about in values. Okay,
so the big guiding principles that are sort of instilled in us that guide our life. Okay, so that makes sense. So why is it important for our kids and teens then that we do address this issue?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important for our young people that we encourage this to happen. What we all kind of are super aware of is that, kids and young people today are exposed to massive amounts of information through a whole range of different sources and channels. And unfortunately, I think, in this day and age, sometimes a lot of those messages are actually quite superficial in nature. And to some degree, some may even be actually dangerous to, kids and teens. Some of the stuff that we see on social media and all of that kind of thing can be not very helpful. And so really what we need to be able to help young people to become discerning about all of that information that they're receiving, and to have a filter to be able to pass that through, because there aren't necessarily a whole lot of filters that exist naturally kind of in the environment. And so obviously we would hope that parents themselves are a filter to the messages that come to our young people. But there is obviously, particularly for teenagers, there's that point where you get to where it's kind of like, I have to object to something just because mum or dad said it is that way. And that's an inevitable part of development. It's not a bad thing in itself. But what that is kind of the young person being able to decide for themselves about what's important to me. And so really being able to develop and instill values in our young people means that they have a kind of inbuilt filter that's going to be really important for them to be able to process all the stuff that happens around them in the world.
Yeah, so important, isn't it? And I've got a 14-month-old little girl at the moment, and at the moment she doesn't really object to anything I say. She just seems to laugh at everything I say, and Dada is the most important person in the world, and Mummy, obviously. But I'm really not looking forward to those teenage years, and they're a long way off, but they'll be here in a flash. So yes. I'm super interested to learn about this topic, that's for sure. So, this webinar is part of our Resilient Kids and Youth project. And so, we're always trying to tie that back into how do our kids develop and build resilience. So how does having a strong value set help our kids and teens develop resilience, do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the main things and one of the differences that I guess that we want to be able to understand is that values are not based on feelings. So
Okay.
therefore, in a sense, they're not subject to our emotion, to how we feel on any given day. We don't change our values each day based on how we feel that particular day. So, really, in terms of developing resilience, values can give us a way of moving beyond just our feelings and therefore promote some of those aspects of resilience. Because I guess, that idea about resilience is I can't be kind of pushed around all over the place based on, what's happening or how I feel about it. And values is that kind of, I guess, the foundational principle that hopefully we can kind of stand on, in a sense
Mm.
that I can come back to that as kind of an anchor point.
Mm. Yeah, it's like that sort of your point of truth, isn't it? Almost, it's. I like the word how you said it's a foundation. It's sort of this is what is going to hold me, especially through these turbulent
Yeah,
times, and that is what I can stand firm on and go. I know all this is happening outside of here, and these kids are saying this, and I'm getting tempted to go and try this or do that. But does that actually align with my values? Is self awareness like does that kind of play into the same sort of thing? Like having that sort of to be able to in the moment filter that is that values as well, or is that a completely different topic for another podcast?
um, so there probably is a whole podcast in that, but I think it's probably self-awareness is a key aspect to being able to develop our value.
Okay.
um, because I guess that's, as we said, it's about what's important in life. And so my level of self-awareness then helps me to determine what's important in my life. And it might be that, when I feel something, maybe when if I feel angry about something, say, that might be about because I see something that is inconsistent with my values, and that's where the anger comes from. So I guess self-awareness is kind of the bridge between those two things for me to go, okay, I feel really upset about this. What is that about? Oh, actually, I think it's about the fact that this is something that's really important to me, and that feels like a situation where I'm not getting this bit that's important to me. So self-awareness, I think, is a really important key.
Okay, sounds good. So what can parents and carers, what can they do now then to give their kids this start in life, this great start in life in regards to setting a firm foundation of values for them?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that parents and carers can do is actually to be able to identify and clarify their own values. And it's, often kind of surprising, but maybe kind of not, that when I'm working with people in therapy, if I ask them about what their values are, that lots of people really actually struggle to identify that. We kind of get caught up in the day-to-day of our life and doing whatever it is that we do most of the time, and we don't always kind of stop to sort of pause and think about, but how is this connected to something that's really important to me? So actually being able to kind of name and define your own values is a great start. And I think too, for parents and carers, as we're trying to develop this in our kids, what we can do is to maybe reference that when we're thinking about other people's stories and actions, is kind of, maybe seeing, I don't know, like movies or things on TV and kind of discussing about, oh, what do you think that says about that person's values? Or, maybe something that's in the news about, oh, what do you imagine might be important for that person when they do this? So it's a great way of helping us to begin to see the perspective of others as well.
Mm. Yeah, I really like that what you said about the sort of referencing or using other people's stories as an example. Like, one of the things I was thinking was when you talked about, it's important for parents to start naming their values. That can be a really challenging thing, especially when a lot of us have never done that. But actually, it's probably an easy way to start doing that in yourself, maybe in watching a movie or something, kind of looking at what do you reckon the action is behind what that person's doing, because you can start to then apply that into your own life. So, yeah, I think that's probably a good thing for kids as well. That's how they like to think, isn't it? In stories and practical examples. So,
yes,
yeah, good stuff. So, I guess getting into the meat of it. So, our topic for today is 4 reasons why values are so important for our kids and teens. I think it's probably time to talk about what is point number 1 then.
So I think the first reason is because it can really help kids and young people to actually develop critical thinking and decision-making skills. And so, generally, as we know, kind of kids are impulsive and they typically don't develop those critical thinking skills until much later in life, possibly even well into adolescence. And so I think because values is about really establishing a why for, why do I do something? Why do I feel a certain way? Why am I attracted to, some activities and not others, or some people and not others? Because we're establishing that why, then it helps to develop those critical thinking skills about, I do this thing, but it's not just that I do this, here's why I do it as well. And so it also, I guess, can kind of help us to engage in kind of problem solving. If I know something's not going well here, to think about, okay, so how does this sit in terms of my values? Is maybe the thing not going well because it's not consistent with my values, or is there another reason? And also that ability to think about, how do I make a good decision? On what do I base that? And again, we're kind of building in that foundation that can provide a real direction for us in life. So it can provide us with a reference point for making decisions about behaviour and choices, rather than just, does this seem like a good idea to do this thing right now in this moment? I can think about, okay, but if I did this in this moment, on what would I base it on? How would I connect that to my values? So in that way, it helps us to be able to, I guess, think from different perspectives about things, and also hopefully to lead us towards good decision-making processes.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And, I think there's so many carryovers between, at the moment we're talking about kids and teens, obviously, but I'm just thinking, as you're talking, so much of this obviously applies to parents and adults in general as well. It's so I think life is just, well, not just, but it's a massive amount of decisions. It's just, and they all compound over time to where you end up in life. And I know I've made decisions, and it may just be about what work I want to do or what study, and in the heat of the moment you do that, and then you end up in this place where you go, why am I not happy right now? And if you actually take those steps back, it's because it doesn't align with my values. And so that's a job or a occupation is obviously a big example, but I think those small little things, maybe it is, you're sitting in the playground with your friends, and your friends are teasing somebody, and you get pulled into that. Over time, they all compound, don't they? So, and I think, and this is just me thinking out loud, but it's like anything. It's like a muscle. So the more that you exercise that little litmus test in that moment of, oh, is this aligned with my values? And maybe the wording is not exactly that in a child's head. I doubt it is.
Yes.
But you get better and better at sort of breaking that switch, so you're not on autopilot all the time. So, yeah, so interesting. I'm not sure how I'm going to apply this to my 14-month-old at the moment, but when she gets a bit older, I'm sure this is going to be very, very helpful. So, Oh, that's great, Gavin. So let's jump into number two. What's point number two?
Yeah, so the second reason that this is really important is because developing values helps kids and young adults to see beyond just achievement alone. And I think that's a really important part. So, when we talk about values, one of the ways that I guess we talk about helping to define them is this idea that a value by definition can never be achieved, which kind of sounds strange. And sometimes people kind of go, oh, wow, what does that mean? But what that means is if I have a value around, let's say, being honest, then in theory, I can actually never achieve that in terms of I don't kind of wake up one morning and go, oh, I've done such a great job of being honest for, the last 40 years and don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah,
so it's a value is kind of, we talk about it's a continuous movement in a preferred direction. So I have to keep doing it. I can't get to a point where it's like, oh, I've achieved that and now I can stop. So that really differs it from goals. I mean, goals are really important, but we don't want to get the two kind of mixed up. And also we want to be careful that for our kids, just focusing on achievement alone often means that that's how kids measure their success, and their own sense of kind of worth and well-being is, have I achieved certain things that I was supposed to achieve? Did I get good marks, or, did I kick a goal at the soccer game or anything like that? And so the problem is then it becomes this kind of very momentary thing. And if I'm basing my self-worth on these momentary things, then the momentary things need to keep happening. And if they don't, then that can kind of leave kids with, and I mean, sometimes you see that, say, like with professional sports people or something that, they've achieved at a really high level, but then they have some injury or something. And then for some of them, kind of life falls apart because I can't achieve anymore. And that was what it was all about. I didn't have anything more stable underneath that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I guess in that too, like it's this idea that character development is just as important as a fundamental educational goal or sporting ability. It's the question I sometimes kind of ask clients is about, okay, so in any given moment, who do you choose to be? Not sort of what do you want to achieve, but who do you actually want to be as a person? And so it just helps us to get beyond that kind of momentary, I've got to achieve, I've got to, reach a goal, to something that I think is much more stable and enduring in our life.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? And it's so true about tying, especially around the goals, and you mentioned athletes, but it's all these things that we can't necessarily control, letting them kind of dictate how we see ourselves. And I heard this interesting quote, I think it was yesterday actually, I just saw it on social media around being a dad, and it said something like be the person that you want your kids to be. And I thought, what does that actually mean? And and maybe it's a load of rubbish, I'm not too sure, but like it kind of makes sense in a way, I think, in that you can choose to be that person. You're not going to be 100% perfect every time at it, but if you want your kids to grow up to be honest, try and be honest,
Yes.
And that's that example for them. Or if you want them to be diligent with time management, then you got to do that yourself, just do that yourself. So what kind of things do parents need to think about in order to, help to develop these values in their kids?
Yeah, and I think especially in terms of this kind of going beyond just achievement, what can be really helpful for parents is when you're thinking about, activities or things that you want to involve kids in, is actually looking at what are the values around this, looking at maybe some of the adults that are involved in those activities, and even potentially asking, like at a sporting club or something like that, what are the values of this club? I think it's really, really important. And I remember very early on when my son kind of started playing soccer. It wasn't really something that he went on with. He's not a hugely sporty kid, but he kind of did this little soccer program for very little kids. And I was so impressed by the woman who was running this program, because it was really about, okay, we want to give the kids some basic skills here. That's really important. But actually, really what's important is that they all feel included and they feel, able to kind of participate, and that we're not just looking for who's the best at this, but it's we're all getting in and having a go. And I know there was a bit of a contrast for us a few years ago with when we moved. My daughter was going to a particular dance school, which was a very good dance school, but it was a very good dance school. There was kind of lots of focus on, achievement and technique and all that kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that has a place, especially, for kids who are talented at things and want to be able to develop that. That's an important thing. But we eventually moved our daughter to a different dance school because, she's certainly not a bad dancer, but she's not likely to make a career out of it or anything like that. Yeah. But there was just this really stark difference between the schools, because the other school that she went to, the lady who ran that was really about trying to promote almost a family atmosphere, and we want to encourage really positive relationships and a really positive view of self. And so it was just really kind of, I think, comforting as a parent to know that, actually these other people who are kind of speaking into my child's life, that they have these really good values at the core. And so it's checking that stuff out. I think we have a responsibility to do that. If your kid goes and plays on a sporting team, it's great to kind of think about, how's the sporting team going? Are they working hard and getting better? But some of the important questions are things like, what happens in this team when they lose? Does that actually promote the kind of values that I want my child to have? Does everyone throw a hissy fit because we lost? Or do we go, wow, good job, good effort, and there's lots of encouragement and support around that?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I remember, just as you're speaking, I remember as a kid, I must have been early primary school, so maybe 6 or 7, and me and my brother, we went to a tennis club, and my older brother's quite a good tennis player, but I'm the middle child, and then I've got a younger brother, and we're both pretty rubbish tennis players. But I do remember we would just end up in the far court, the court that's never been maintained ever, with a bucket of balls, and the coach would just go, you guys just hit to each other, and he would just focus on those better tennis players. And It wasn't, my brother and I, we got really upset about this, and we don't want to go to tennis anymore. And I remember Mum saying, this is interesting, I've never thought about this for a long time, but maybe I need to come and see you about this afterwards. But he said, they're not good enough, so they're not really worth it, in those sort of words, And Mum and Dad had no idea. They'd just been sending us along. Right. And they go, why don't you boys want to go to play tennis? And it's because we didn't get anything out of it. And so they actually ended up taking us, saying to us, what sport do you want to play? We ended up playing soccer. And we were quite good at soccer, but completely different environment. It was very much, under sevens. No one's winning the World Cup when they're... So it didn't really matter, So, yes. but that made such a big difference. But it took my parents it took us boys actually talking to my parents about it. Whereas if my parents probably had have gone in and earlier and checked it out a bit more thorough, we wouldn't have ended up spending 6 months in misery and spending lots of money on tennis coaching, So yes. Just a story that just highlights that, I guess, from my own experience. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, parents, like obviously we would all like to think that our kids kind of, internalize the messages that we want to give them. But it's, we're not, we can't be all influential in a sense. And so making sure that other adults that your kids are encountering are kind of speaking that same stuff into their life, I think is a really important thing to be working towards.
Yeah, that's really important. Alrighty, tip number 3. What do we got?
Yeah, so developing values in our kids, I think, will help guide them towards actually positive relationships. So, if my values are really clear, then I actually know why the people who are in my life are in my life. Because to some degree, those people are a reflection of my values. If I have a sense of this is who I am as a person, then to some degree, I'm kind of attracted to and associating with people that have similar type values and maybe, that demonstrate some values that I kind of think, oh, I don't have so much of that. I need to grow in that. And so therefore I want to be hanging around with this person so that, that kind of rubs off on me. And so the same thing will happen for kids. If we describe values to some degree as kind of who you are when nobody is looking, a lot of our kids' behaviour actually occurs outside the direct supervision of adults. Especially these days on social media and things like that. Obviously, we can monitor that to some degree, which is a good thing. But there's still a lot of stuff that happens. Sometimes I think about, what is my child really like when they're in the classroom? I know what I think they're like, but what are they actually like? And so,
I know what I'd like them to be like.
Yes.
How are they actually?
Yeah. So it's it's our own kids, but also other people's kids as well. I mean, I think it's important for parents to kind of know who are my kids' friends and what are those kids like. But, we might see a kind of very staged managed version of, my son's friend Johnny, who is really nice and polite when he's around me. But if they're, off down the street or something and he's swearing at people or something like that. So the point is that if our kids have a good sense of values, then they're kind of going to be able to go, oh, hang on a minute, my friend Johnny kind of looks like this over here, but then is quite different over here. And that doesn't seem very consistent. And so again, it's that kind of reference point that they can go, look at other people and go, oh, I know you say that you're this, but actually you're something else. And what that tells me is you may not actually be necessarily a positive person for me to be hanging around. And so it gives them that wider frame of reference that goes beyond things like, who's the cool kid, or, oh, these are the kids that I hang around because they're just interested in the same stuff. That hopefully kids can start to go, well, but who is this person as a person? And is that someone that I want to be friends with and hanging out with? So it kind of helps them to be a little bit discerning, I think, in terms of their relationships.
Yeah, that's so important, isn't it? And, I think through to as an adult, if we can develop that in our kids early on, man, we can save a lot of heartache later on as adults, as we either don't develop that at all, or if we get to that point where we are kind of forced to really do that look into ourselves and develop that. So, really interesting. What's the last tip? What's tip number 4, Gavin?
Yeah, so I think generally we kind of hinted at this. Values just provide for us an anchor that kind of helps us negotiate all kinds of change, and obviously that can be. There's lots of change for children and teenagers as they grow up. And so having a good sense of values, a good sense of who I am and what's important to me, that really, I think, helps kids to feel secure in those change times. So, there might be things like, when kids, especially from rural communities, maybe go to boarding school or stuff like that, it's like, okay, there's lots of challenges here. There's lots of messages again about, who other people think that I should be. But do I have a really good sense of who I am as a person and why that's important to me? And that just kind of helps provide that, again, that foundation, that, yeah, I can use that as a bit of a compass, if you like. I can make decisions. I can think about things critically. And it's from this basis of, these are my values, this is what's important to me, and that's how I want to live.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? So, it's such a big topic, and we could keep talking and talking about this for so long, because I think it is such a, I like the word anchor. It does really anchor kind of, and governs, I guess, how we live really the rest of our life, isn't it? Around our values and who we are as a person. So coming back to kids and teens and parents, we talked at the start about how it's really important that parents sort of get to know what their own values are, because it's very hard to obviously teach a child if you don't know yourself. Life's really busy for everybody. It might be hard to kind of sit down and do a long self-assessment, but are there any sort of, not looking for quick tips necessarily, but say we want to begin this conversation with our kids and teens, are there any sort of places we should start with that, or opening ways to do it, do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the things is kind of noticing what kind of the moments or activities that kind of bring positive stuff to us, where we sort of feel good in a sense. So, if I think about, there's a concept in psychology, the idea of what we call flow, which is the idea that when a person is in flow, that they kind of lose track of time. So we experience this sometimes if we're doing something that we really enjoy. So to some degree, flow is kind of connected to values. And so we might kind of notice, I don't know, say I came home we had lunch with some friends of ours or something, and I come home and I think, man, that was such a great time. I really enjoyed that. And just kind of tapping in even momentarily to what was so good about that? Why do I feel so good about that? Because that can help me to kind of go, oh, there's something that I value there. And maybe it's the fact that, those people are so encouraging and I feel really uplifted when I've kind of spent time with them. Or, maybe I'm doing a particular activity, like maybe something creative or artistic, and I get kind of really caught up in that and I love doing it. And noticing that, the fact that I love doing this, there's some values connected here. And what might that be? It might be about creativity and artistic expression and that kind of thing. So I think it's those really positive times in our life can kind of give us little clues that we can tap into and start to kind of go, I think this is the value that this is about. So it's sort of, it's not necessarily a kind of, let me sit down for an hour and think really hard about what's important to me. But actually, when I look at my life across, a day or a week or a year, what does this tell me about what's important to me? And I guess maybe, sometimes the tricky thing early on is we might also notice, what does this tell me about what's not important to me as well? For us as parents, sometimes if I kind of look back, over my week and found that I've, worked 80 hours that week, what does that tell me about my values? How do I feel about that? So it's a kind of, it's not meant to be, I guess, an intellectual exercise, but rather a connection with what's the day-to-day of my life. How do I feel about that? And what does that tell me about what I think is really important?
Yeah, that's great. So it is really a self-assessment rather than kind of you're not setting the goals and going, I'm going to become this, and this. Although there's a place for that as well, but it's sort of it's probably better in in retrospect to look introspection to look back and go, actually, what's giving me energy, what's not giving me energy, and do an assessment in that stage as to how you actually feel, not how you think you might feel in the future.
Yes.
So, really, that's great. Yeah, great explanation. So let's do a quick recap because we had 4 points. They're all important. So I always find it really helpful to do this when I'm listening along. So the 4 reasons why values are so important for our kids and teens. We talked about reason number 1 was this helps kids and teens to develop critical thinking and decision-making skills. Reason number 2 was helps to see beyond achievement alone, really important. Reason number 3 will guide kids towards positive relationships. And reason number 4, values provide an anchor through change. So I think there's some pretty important reasons why we need to really dig deep and make this a conscious effort to explore this with our kids and teens and in ourselves as well. So Gavin, thanks so much for chatting today. It's I've learned so much. I think I need to go and investigate that tennis story that I was talking about. I think there's some deeper issues there that I haven't quite worked through. But thanks so much for joining us. And for those who are watching or listening, thanks for joining us. And really hope that you've got some great value out of this. No pun intended, considering we're talking about values. But this has been part of our Resilient Kids and Youth webinar series. So you can check out on our website, outbackfutures.org.au is where all the past webinars are that people have done, which are really, really informative. And you can also listen to them on Spotify as well, just at Outback Futures. If you want to do that in the car or go for a run or go for a walk, sometimes easier than watching it. So, thanks so much, Gavin. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. And, we hope to see you in the next one. So thanks again.
Thanks, Rich.